The MMO genre has been seeing a few trends the last few years, and I wanted to take a moment to talk about some of these changes and why I think they may be taking place. The biggest trend that I see in MMOs today is a transition away from larger scale content like large scale PvP and focusing more on solo or small scale content like dungeons, or in this case, like World of Warcraft's new Delve system. A lot of this is going to be anecdotal as I myself trend more towards small scale content as of late, but I think some of you may agree with what I've experienced that has caused these shifts. So let's talk about it. The first thing I want to discuss is who MMOs are generally made for. On average, this gaming space is occupied by mainly middle-aged people. If you're a millennial like myself and watching this video, I'm guessing you grew up in a household where games like World of Warcraft, EverQuest, Lineage, or similar games were played by your parents. We grew up around these games, and as such, we kind of grew with the gaming space as well, if that makes sense. As such, we're kind of more emotionally attached to this style of game. However, the younger generation doesn't have that same level of attachment. Now, the younger populations tend to skip the MMO genre in favor of other types of games. And this leads me to my first point on why I think MMOs are making a shift. The amount of time required to play an MMO is much higher than any other game. Just to get through the leveling process in some more hardcore style of games, it'll take you close to 60 hours alone. And while the leveling process is part of the journey in MMOs, it's not always the most appealing aspect, and that is a bit of an issue. Many people just want to jump straight into some of the cool stuff that they can do, like endgame raids or PvP, mount farming, stuff like that. They don't always want to spend such an extreme amount of their very limited resource and time doing things like just simply leveling up. As a result, the younger crowds seem to be skipping MMOs due to these time constraints. They're more likely to jump into short, quick gaming sessions such as Roblox, Minecraft, and games similar to those. And much like the population crisis in South Korea, it means that MMOs are going to see more and more of an aging population. The average MMO gamer at this point are millennials, which are ages 29 through 44. Many of these people are at a point in their lives where they might have a stable job or kids, and those things are going to eat up so much of your time. These players are certainly still able to participate in large scale content like raids or PvP, but it becomes increasingly difficult and hard to justify keeping a subscription when you're struggling to do the type of content you enjoy. So in order to keep an aging population invested, MMO developers are introducing more and more content that can be done without the need to schedule in advance for us adults who are becoming increasingly busy and unable to attend some of these raid events. But timing isn't the only issue that MMO populations are faced with. How many of you have experienced a scenario like this? You have an hour to kill and you're trying to gear up a relatively new character. To progress your character, you need to join a raid or perhaps a dungeon group. You apply to said groups, but are consistently denied. Before you know it, that hour has passed and you're no longer able to play. Gatekeeping, elitism, toxic culture, call it what you will, but it's present in almost any multiplayer game. This type of behavior causes players to begin feeling isolated. These players want to be able to progress their character and try to achieve different goals, but sometimes those goals are unobtainable with how some group content is designed. I understand why gatekeeping exists. If everyone only has 1 hour to play, you want to make sure that that 1 hour goes as smoothly as possible. This usually means that there are different metrics in these MMOs now that can be used to kind of vet and gauge the potential success of your group that you're forming. I remember playing Lost Ark, and trying to join raids was a complete nightmare. There would usually be some sort of arbitrary requirement like, oh, your character must have this certain achievement. However, you could just buy a carry group to receive that achievement, essentially bypassing some of these vetting requirements that players would have. And this would usually mean that some inexperienced players were managing to get into raid groups when they certainly didn't know the fights and they shouldn't be there. I think game devs are introducing some forms of content for the solo players where they can avoid some of this gatekeeping, a form of content that all players can participate in. WoW has started to do this in the form of story raids where you can go and fight the last boss of a raid, albeit it's very easy and you're using AI team members, but it's still a way to experience the story solo. In addition, there are now delves, which are a form of solo-based content where you can have an AI companion help guide you through some of these solo dungeons where you can get gear and loot at the end. Lost Ark is also following suit because they had 8-man raids, but recently they introduced a solo raid format. So it's really nice to catch up certain characters who are maybe possibly gatekept. But overall, there are so many more casual solo players than there are hardcore players. And by introducing solo content, game devs can likely retain more of their audience who would have otherwise burned out because of being gatekept and unable to comfortably see the content that they were trying to experience. But overall, I think the toxic culture only plays a minor role in some of these changes, if any at all. The last topic here, and the most important, is talking about sustainability. I alluded to this a bit earlier, but MMOs are a difficult genre to make a game for. Like any other game, you first need to appeal to a large population, and then you need to sustain a portion of that population with continuous content drops. However, there's an issue where MMOs just cost a ton of money up front, just developing tools that are used to kind of create the backend systems and foundations of the game. This is why a game like Ashes of Creation is likely never going to be released from its alpha phase. It's astronomically challenging, and it leads to a lot of MMOs shutting down servers within a couple years of launching. And then to add even more challenge to this, games designed for large-scale conflict these days, they tend to be doomed from the start. There are a lot of performance issues with a lot of games of large scale group sizes. And then sometimes when these negative performance issues are experienced, it creates a negative stigma for an MMO that is very difficult to remove. One example that I have of this is Throne and Liberty. When the game first launched, it seemed like it was doing pretty okay. Then a month or two went by and we finally got to experience the castle sieges, which were that game's capstone type of content where it was like hundreds versus hundreds of people on a single server. Due to both performance and clunky mechanics, I think a lot of people saw that type of content wasn't for them, and then they promptly quit the game. And since then, Throne and Liberty has actually introduced 12-man raid groups, so it seems like they're transitioning more from a PvP-centric game back into more of a smaller scale raid PvE-based game. All of this is just to say that games tend to be easier to create sustainable content for when the core audience needs to only be 4 to maybe 10-man groups. It's also easier for the players to commit to types of games where there's a lot less coordination, where you don't need to coordinate with, say, 20 people for a mythic raid in World of Warcraft. This is my personal biggest reason as to why I believe we're seeing a shift in smaller scale content for MMOs like that of Ghost. We have Fellowship coming up, and I'm very interested to see how those types of games will perform, because I think if they do well, we could see a pretty big shift in the MMO space. If you made it this far into the video, first off, thank you very much. I appreciate you watching it to the end. And secondly, if you would take just a second to hit that subscribe button, it goes a really long way for a small channel like mine to continue to grow, and you'll also be notified when more MMO content is coming in the future. But I also want to hear from you. Let me know down in the comments what your main MMO is and what you've put the most time into, because, well, I'm kind of curious as to what types of communities this video is resonating with. But this was GooberTroy, and again, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye!